We're really so delighted to be leading this session, and I think it's been such a rich, engaging series that has allowed us to work in partnerships to talk about progressive Judaism that will be, but liberal and reform etiquette and minhagim, customs thus far. And I couldn't be more delighted to be working with Rabbi Robyn on this. So I'm Rebecca Birk. I'm Rabbi of Finchley Progressive Synagogue, a liberal synagogue. And actually, Robyn and I had the pleasure of working together when Rabbi Renee Furtzel and I were co-chairs of Rabbinic Conference of Liberal Clergy. And I think Robyn and Kath, you're about to have your last one next Tuesday. So I think that I'll just say one more thing about me and hand over to Robyn. I think the privilege of accompanying folk on their life cycle moments, literally all the way, the whole gambit, is one of the best bits of being a rabbi, and the creativity that there is potential for in these mixed faith blessings has been a fantastic thing to learn with and through and experience these last 20 or so years. So we're really delighted to share this with you, and I'll hand over to Robyn now.
Hi everyone. It is lovely to be with you all and to be with Rabbi Rebecca as always. I remember being a student rabbi at Finchley Progressive with lots of B'nai Mitzvah families. And I think this is a topic that speaks very deeply to my heart because my dad is not Jewish, and I was raised in a family that I think navigated it really well for us. So I'm excited to talk it through. And we really wanted this hour to be informative and also super interactive. So there's going to be lots of moments where we want to hear from you about your experiences of times when it hopefully worked well, how we navigate it. And we kind of have 4 parts. I think, Rebecca, maybe you'll talk us through that in a second. So I'm up in Manchester doing a PhD on prophecy at the moment, feminist prophecy for female clergy today. And I think the reason why, if we're thinking in prophetic terms, it's about the world that we want to be, the world we want to build, and being inclusive of understanding there are many different ways of being Jewish and living Jewishly is a real core principle of progressive Judaism. So this isn't just a nice thing to do. I think for me, this really reflects a core of what we understand it is to be Jewish and what we understand it is to be progressively Jewish as well.
Brilliantly said. So Robyn and I have carved up our hour, and obviously we could have taken way more time, but there's lovely about that principle and boundary of a Zoom call, that's your energy really, that we are going to divide things up, first of all, into a few texts that we found that we think speak very beautifully to what it means to be in partnership or to be part of community. The second bit will be talking about attitudes to that, both from within progressive Judaism and outside of it. And the third will be looking at the actual ceremonies, the dual heritage ceremonies, and an opportunity really for you to interact and share things that you've seen or would love to see. And then lastly, just what it means to live Jewishly or to live in a Jewish adjacent way, which is a term that I've recently learned, and I think is a beautiful term. I think how many families I have at Finchley Progressive Synagogue that really would occupy that space.
We've got just, I think it's 3 texts, maybe 4, possibly very short ones to help ground and have us textually rooted and theologically, which is one of my new words, which is a goddess or feminine inspired type of theology, but that's maybe for another session. And I'm going to introduce this first text, which some of you may know because I like to share it everywhere I go, and it's by Rabbi Sheila Schulman, and it was in her essays watching for the morning. So Sheila wrote in her collected book of sermons this phrase, this quotation: "We Jews arrive at our understanding of how we, human beings, are all connected and the same through our understanding of how we, human beings, are each, all of us, distinct and unique." It's not the easiest of quote sentences to work through. It's a bit complex, but what I really take from this is the fact that we understand ourselves through the community that we are in and the community that we build. In the world that we live in today, there's this sense that we are, individual selves, and we put our energies into that to be in community, as we know, is not always easy, but it really ultimately is this idea that we're not separate. And we're not separate from either from being Jewish and to non-Jews either. There's the fallacy of the silos that we live in, or the supremacy of what it is to be attached to one people, one nation, maybe one tribe. And who we welcome in and who is part of our community makes a huge difference to who we are and how we understand each other. And that really is like the basis for me of what this work is about. It completely demystifies this very dangerous fallacy that we are separate in some way, because we all know that our sense of freedom, our sense of self is bound up with the other. And the other might be someone who's Jewish or someone who's Muslim or someone no faith, that we're all bound up together. And this is really about how to be in relationship with everyone in different ways. And we're going to look through what that means of inclusion in community. But I think more than inclusion, it's about celebrating, and it's about us changing our communities to welcome people in. Rabbi Kath Vardy always talks about, we have this idea with inclusion that, we should welcome people in, and then we tell them, this is how we do things. So if you want to be part of us, you need to acclimatize to what we are. But really, this is about, okay, we've got Jewish adjacent families, blended families, whatever it is, and we're going to change who we are to meet you and where you are, and we're all richer and better off for it. So I've got two pasukim, two verses here, and the first one is well known, maybe. This is from Shemot, Exodus, and it's the story, we're kind of around this kind of part of the story-ish, when I was learning Yitro earlier today, so I feel like I'm in this part of the Torah at the moment, even though we're not there in the liturgy. This, we know, is a story of when Yitro, the priest of Midian, not an Israelite, met Moses. And this verse says, Moses consented to stay with the man, that's Yitro, his later father-in-law, and Yitro gave Moses his daughter, Zipporah, a non-Israelite, as a wife. And that really, there's no commentary on it. It just happens. They are married, they're as one. They then quickly have two children, and it kind of carries on. A kind of nondescript part of the story of marrying someone from a different tribe. There was no commentary on it in the text. But we know that really sits in tension in the Tanakh with some really difficult texts, some really racist texts, I would say. The clearest one is here in Deuteronomy, where we have this command that people tend to kind of take out of context or rely on, where it says, you shall not intermarry with them. And particularly they were talking about Canaanite nations, and when they went into the land, and they were told to kind of dispossess them. And part of the commandment was to not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters their sons, or take their daughters for your sons. So heteronormative, as well as being really difficult. And that has been taken and expanded to say Jews should only marry Jews. It's really deeply offensive. But what I love about putting these two things together, and this happens time and time again in the Torah, is that the stories and the reality of what it is to be human always subvert the law. So you have these really orthodox, conservative commands of what you shouldn't do. Well, you should stone your stubborn and rebellious son. We don't do that. And we've got many other commands that are really difficult. And there are many stories like Moses and Zipporah that really subvert and show that people were living their lives really in relationship with each other and not separate. But the last thing I'll say before passing back to Rabbi Rebecca is, I think, and I'm sure you've experienced as I have, that this undertone, this tension and this discomfort with welcoming and being with people who are not Jewish in every aspect of us being Jewish is still there. So we can't ignore it. As much as we want to be celebratory and inclusive, we've also got to realize we've still got work to do to try and really talk to this kind of streak that we have in our text and in our communities as well. But Moses and Zipporah stay there as a role model to us, that we've been doing this and marrying and loving for many, many years.
Just seeing in the context of all 65 of us on this call, seeing the verse about Moses and Zipporah reminds me, of course, that when we bless our children on a Friday night, or any time, strangely, it skips the patriarchs in the way that we bless girls to be like the matriarchs, but we skip them to Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And what is so interesting about them, and there are all sorts of midrashim, why them? Is it because they didn't fight when their grandfather Jacob mixed up their birth order? But of course, they also are the product of a marriage where Joseph married Asenath. And I find it charming every Friday night that all parts of Judaism, both Orthodox and Progressive, use that family as a model family. Joseph married an Egyptian, Asenath, had two sons. He describes their names similarly in the same way that Moses describes his sons' names, of being slight foreigner or of having a mixture in the family. And I just think it's there. It's there all the way through, which takes me to the fourth text. I think Robyn's going to and I love this text. This is a text that we encounter at the story of Pesach and preparing for Seder. And in Hebrew, V'gam erev rav, Allah, v'tzon v'bakar, miknei kaved me'od. So moreover, as the Israelites are being described, the Hebrews leaving Egypt, what is described? An erev rav. A mixed congregation goes up with them. This has to be hinting at, implying that already there was no such thing as purity. There was a mixture of peoples that had fallen in love, that had worked together, built families. It was a mixed community right from the get-go. Before the congregation stood at Sinai, there was a mixed congregation there. And so for me, this really captures Joseph's heritage, his children that are named every time we bless our children, that mixedness, that richness, that messiness, there is nothing new. We know that. Ecclesiastes reminds us there's nothing new under the sun. And I think that sense of togetherness, of entwinedness, has been with us from Torah onwards. So with that understanding, we're moving into the second section that Robyn and I have prepared, which is comments on, as Robyn and I put in our blurb, how outdated is the term marrying out. And it certainly is for all of us, probably on the call in all of our congregations, but not everywhere. And we wanted to juxtapose two texts or two ideas, one from the more traditional community that you might all remember from the beginning of the 90s, and one that was literally last year. So some of you might remember this moment. I just graduated from university. I was really thinking about what I wanted to do, and I was super aware of this new organization. In 1993, the creation, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs created this organization based on the strapline, "Will we have Jewish grandchildren and how to achieve it?" It was called Jewish Continuity. Jewish Continuity burst onto our kind of Jewish screens, as it were, with great enthusiasm in 1993 and into 1994. Their offices were in Belsize Park, just near the Everyman Cinema. It was meant to herald exactly what it said on the tin, a way to prevent and stop our young Jewish sons, daughters, children from falling in love with people who are not Jewish. And that is entirely its purpose. It was created for the sole purpose of reducing intermarriage. It was followed Rabbi Sachs's first book, written as chief rabbi with the same title, which was Will We Have Jewish Grandchildren? How to Achieve It. Clive Lawton, who really has become like a national treasure in the Jewish world in terms of his skill as a Jewish educator, was persuaded to leave his very successful successful headship at Liverpool's King David School, and actually for about 30 years or so, he led High Holy Day services at the Oxford Jewish congregation, which is where I grew up. And so he was, in many sense and purposes, a rabbi for me. And yet he jumped ship into this new, untried endeavor. And the message was dramatic. What will God have given us if we gain all else and lose our own children? Meaning, what does anything else matter if our children are not following? He started to speak, Sachs, and then Lawton followed to say there was an idea that 20% of children stay on the course. Should we only follow those, or should we really stop and consider that 80% of young Jews who were going elsewhere, who were falling in love with other people? It was seen as brilliant in mainstream Orthodoxy. Amazingly, UJIA, chose to fund it significantly. But as you can imagine, it was seen as alienating and unhelpful by others, because its sole purpose was not a richness of what Judaism could offer, but it was from a place of fear of stopping any kind of interaction. I shared with Robyn and that a former head of the World Union of of Progressive Judaism shared a wonderful story of a flyer that was sent to all students at Hillel for a period. Hillel is like our Hillel house, Hillel across American universities, saying how to stop intermarriage, and it seemed like it was going to be offensive, but on the other side of the sheet was never let your children leave the house. Because of course we post-Enlightenment in Reform and Progressive Judaism recognize the benefits, the huge benefits of interacting with the outside world, of gleaning wisdom from other disciplines. So why on earth would that not happen, that you live cheek by jowl significantly with others? So some of you will recall that, and maybe you'll add in the chat if you do recall that period of the 90s and that very strict response that United Synagogue offered. And then it was really comforting to see one of our chief executives, Rabbi Josh Levy, who is leading Reform Judaism at the moment, writing this in his 1,000 words on a particular topic that MRJ very helpfully have on its website, but I think it was also published in Jewish News. I think maybe Jewish News and not the Jewish Chronicle. So I'm just going to read it in case anyone doesn't have it so clearly on their screen. The first thing we have learned, he wrote, is that prohibition doesn't work. The divine command that Robyn brought to us, you shall not intermarry with them, has little weight in our communities. Being against intermarriage, as parts of the Jewish world are, doesn't make it go away. The link between upbringing and who we marry is not straightforward. As the American Rabbi Lawrence Kushner writes, we now have enough data to say categorically there is simply no way to stop Jews from marrying non-Jews. Fierce rabbinic bans are risibly ineffective. Insulting forms of covert ostracism only make us look xenophobic and weak. We have learned something else too, and perhaps more importantly, that the passage from Deuteronomy, as well as being ineffective, is also just plain wrong. The reason it gives for the prohibition, they will turn your children away from me to worship other gods, is not accurate. And we love that, and we love that it is still being repeated, articulated, even to last year. And as you're probably curious to see where the history of what's been allowed in the two movements, it's really nice to see Rabbi Josh Levy, leading Reform Judaism, writing such a strong piece. Thank you for popping in the chat, Simon, the article. And yeah, here it is, the 1,000 words.
I'll just say the thing that had come up for me when you were speaking, Rabbi Rebecca, was a piece that I read ages ago when I was a student by Rabbi Rami Shapiro, which really stayed with me. And it said that our grandparents were Jewish because God told them. They had that fervent faith in God and the Torah. Our parents keep Jewish because their parents did. It was tradition. That's just what you did. And that we and our grandchildren will be Jewish because it's meaningful to us and it reflects the values that we want to live. And I think that's always like a driving force. And I think what we're talking about is really that. What kind of community do we want to be in? Do we want the divisions? Do we want Judaism to thrive and have meaning? And I think we do. And this is one way of making sure it does. What we're going to do first is talk about, within liberal and reform Judaism, a little bit about the history of dual heritage blessings, we're calling them, but there's lots of different names for them. And then a little bit about what the ceremonies look like.
It turns out that even by the turn of the 90s, liberal rabbis were leading mixed faith blessings in a private arrangements between the couple and the rabbi. Talking to Rabbi Mark Solomon, who holds a lot of the memories of liberal Judaism, he says that Rabbi John Rayner certainly had liturgy by this time that he used with couples, but no chuppah was allowed. Around 2004, liberal Jewish clergy made more explicit rules, and synagogues got more involved since it became possible to hold a blessing in the synagogue. I was a newly ordained rabbi at Woodford Progressive Synagogue that was LLs now, and I remember at that time that some of you may have encountered Rabbi Guy Hall, who trained at Leobeck College. He had begun to lead such ceremonies using chuppah before it was allowed, and whilst it was still quite tentative what these rabbis were doing in a more private way, and he was excluded knowingly. He chose that to be excluded from the rabbinic conference. Once ceremonies were allowed to take place in synagogues, I think it changed the ballpark for lots of people. I remember being at Woodford and I was a very new rabbi, and I felt that I had to develop confidence to understand what it meant to do something in the synagogue. And I remember watching many of my senior colleagues and feeling that I was barely ready to do any life cycle events, but I certainly wanted to be sure that I did such a ceremony with integrity and kindness and knowledge and wisdom. And it wasn't until, amazingly, 2020, several of us colleagues, when we started to look today, were really surprised by how late it was, that liberal Judaism offers mixed faith couples a wedding blessing from a rabbi under a chuppah. So it was 2020, around the time of Simchat Torah, and I found all the publicity that we threw out at that time. And I found a wonderful quotation from Rabbi Danny Rich. I've spent my career promoting a liberal Judaism which is both inclusive but respectful of diversity. The offer of a chuppah as a symbol of Jewish domestic values affirms both a welcome and a respect for people who are embarking on a lifelong relationship. So I think what I was keen to show you is that it changes and grows all the time. The conversation we had in 2020 as liberal rabbis also included, which actually was about weddings or mixed faith blessings. Do we do them on a Saturday night? Do we do them like how soon after Shabbat? Or do we do them just like early evening, we allow ourselves, or do we all say we'd rather not? Now, obviously, there is always going to be kind of clergy discretion as to how things are done. And within the ceremonies, a smashing of the glass was used right from the beginning, but different ways of choosing around the 7 wedding blessings were still there, about what was said when rings are exchanged. We can talk more about that. But for me, it's been really interesting. I was ordained as a rabbi in 2001. So I was ordained into a tradition where this was happening.
We're really going to align to the reform position, which is kind of now basically the same. I came into Leobeck College as a student after this had been there. So this has always been part of my rabbinate. So it was in 2012, after quite a long process and consultation, that the Assembly of Reform Rabbis and Cantors of the UK, which is our clergy body, which I currently co-lead, voted. And you can see here, like the terminology is quite specific, isn't it? They voted to allow ceremonies of celebration after a mixed faith wedding. And I think there really was this consideration that this wasn't the wedding. So, one important legal thing to say is that as clergy, we can only, by the state, marry two people who are Jewish. So, even if we wanted to, and I would really want to, we can't do a British legal, an English legal wedding or Scottish legal wedding for two people who aren't Jewish. We're just not allowed to. So this was trying to say that you would need to get married, which is indeed still the case. You need to have a civil marriage before you have your Jewish blessing or Jewish wedding. And here in 2012, it was really keen to make sure that this wasn't seen as a wedding, that this was a celebration after a wedding. I think probably people are a bit more relaxed now. There's still, as Rabbi Rebecca said, a massive diversity in how we practice this. There are some guidelines about certain things we won't do. So, for example, in that guideline, it says we won't. I think it's maybe different in some liberal synagogues, won't officiate with another faith leader. So, if it was me and an imam, for example, we wouldn't do that, and that the family have to commit to a Jewish home, whatever that means going forward. So there were guidelines around what it could include and what it couldn't. And I think there's a bit more flexibility now than there was in 2012, but there's still a really quite wide variety of what rabbis get involved with or don't. I have to say I've done a number of dual heritage blessings because they're one of my favorite things to do, which we'll maybe get into why that is. And most people come up after and say that was a beautiful wedding. Like they don't see it as being a ceremony of celebration after a mixed faith wedding. They see it as being a really beautiful wedding. So that's where we are now. So we're all kind of on the same page, although we have diversity of practice because we do with absolutely everything. Anything that we do will look different depending on the clergy member who is leading it.
Janet has asked, is it true that a liberal rabbi cannot co-officiate with a clergy person from another faith? So there has been a decision to leave it up to clergy discretion, with the same caveat that Robyn has talked about, that's deeply important to liberal rabbis too, which is a commitment to a Jewish home and to raise subsequent children Jewishly, even if there is a desire to educate and expose them to the non-Jewish family. So there is really, I think, a very profound understanding of the delicacy of that situation. So I do know colleagues, and I also have done so. I think I've done two. One was uncomfortable, and it was for a family member, and I was slightly hoodwinked into that, as sometimes happens with family, into a ceremony that didn't feel quite as comfortable as I had planned it to be. And one was with a local minister, which we worked out for a very long time about how the couple were committed to raising children and why they were doing that and why they wanted this nod to family traditions. So yes, they are with clergy discretion allowed to do that, and that will really depend on the clergy and on the situation. Ellie or Ali, I'm trying to understand, was the civil marriage first also part of the liberal practice? Do you mean, can liberal rabbis marry a mixed couple legally?
I think it means that you have to have the civil first.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
So, well, if you want it to be legal, you have to have that first. Absolutely. There are some people that don't bother about the legal part and want a ceremony that declares their love and commitment to each other. But certainly, if you want a legal wedding, a legal marriage, then it would be with the registrar, either at the registry office, or sometimes a registrar will share, not literally share the floor, but I have done many mixed faith blessings where they're there and just slip out and sometimes even watch because they're interested and stay in the room as I come straight afterwards. I'm just looking at Simon. Why can a synagogue not marry two people from different faiths? Is this the same for other faith institutions? Is this British law? Yes, it is. So the Jews in Britain were given this amazing gift, which was that they don't have to be married in a consecrated, licensed venue, which makes choosing a venue to get married in super different, easier than it does for people of other faiths. And that is the deal. The rabbi themselves is not the one that carries the legality. It is the marriage secretary in the synagogue, of which I see my marriage secretary, Josie Kinchin, on this call. So it will be them that will sign the schedule from your local registry to ensure that it's a legal wedding done by a rabbi for two Jews.
And I've also done a ceremony where we've had the civil first and then the Jewish part of it. And I've also done it where we've just done the dual heritage wedding or blessing and not mentioned the civil part. So the couple didn't, they'd got married separately, and often very much, I think without exception, the couples have said actually it was really special having something intimate, just us with, and they just, take a couple of friends with and then have a big ceremony. So that can work really well. Cynthia, I'll read out what Cynthia wrote. In the late 80s, when we got married, it took us a while to find out that under English law, a rabbi could only marry two Jewish people. This was one of the factors in my husband's decisions to convert.
It's a gift to the Jewish community ad infinitum that they have been allowed by a leader of the faith, rabbi, cantor, whatever, but with the marriage secretary of the synagogue institution. So you can't get married unless two Jews are a member of a synagogue, and it's the synagogue itself that has the right to do the full legal wedding. So when you go, I'm actually getting married in August and went to Barnet Town Hall to register our wedding, and then we will pick up in a couple of months' time from Camden the schedule, and on the day the marriage secretary will sign that schedule and we will send it back to the borough of Camden, and that will enable us to be married. We don't have to be in a licensed building, in a consecrated building. We can get married in my back garden, and it would be...
You did say what's a consecrated?
Consecrated. So consecrated or licensed mean that it has been given specific permission that you can get married there. But you don't need it. When two Jews marry, you don't need to be in a licensed building. You can get married in your garden or in a park or on the beach or wherever.
I'm going to just share a picture on my screen. So we've heard Mazal Tov to Rabbi Rebecca. This is going back to a wedding many years ago. My mum and dad, asked my dad to send me this. He does not know it's going to be shared. That was them standing outside of the registry office in London, apparently quite a famous one where lots of famous people got married. And my mum will still shed a tear knowing that she wasn't able to have any Jewish recognition of her marriage, which is still going strong today. And my dad has raised a rabbi, so that really kind of goes against that Jewish continuity piece. So I really feel very strongly about the power of these ceremonies and what they can do and foster within our communities as well. So we thought what we'd maybe just talk about is actually what the ceremony might look like. And I think for this, it's also about how all weddings can be creative. The principle of the ceremonies being personal, meaningful to the couple, and really reflecting them both as individuals and as a couple. Those principles are for all ceremonies.
Both Jonathan and Erica asking, is this a moment to petition the law to change and give the right to rabbis to marry two people who are not both Jewish? And it's a really interesting question, and obviously we're interested to hear from you. And I think that that's what Erica is responding to. It should be okay for Reform or liberals to marry non-Jews and for the partner to not convert. So obviously that it's able to happen and to have a ceremony, but not for it to be legal without the registrar.
My wife didn't convert and doesn't really have an interest in converting, but she's allowed me to raise our kids Jewish. And the reality is that while she's very supportive of Judaism and supporting me in raising our children Jewish, she doesn't have the same connection to Judaism. It's not her history, it's not who she is, so I can't criticize her for taking that position. So the idea of having a like a ceremony rather than the proper marriage isn't really fair, because she fundamentally wanted the proper marriage in front of everyone. And so to do that in a kind of a a civil thing in a small thing, and then to have a big ceremony which isn't the proper marriage. It wouldn't reach out to her. It would reach out to me as a Jew, but not to her as a non-Jew. So I appreciate how magical those moments can be, but not really a proper marriage. And that's why I think that we should be pushing for change in the law.
It's such a good thing, because I think it really speaks to what, the whole core of what we're talking about is. I completely agree with you, Jonathan. And I think we were going to talk a bit, maybe in about 5 minutes or so as we get towards the end of our time all of a sudden, that, we have many synagogues where if you're not Jewish, you can be a member of a synagogue. You can sit on the council in some synagogues. So if that's the case, then our community includes these people. What would it mean to say, of course, we're going to marry you legally as well if we have certain ceremonies for it? So it's a really interesting question, and one that I think, is to be explored further as well. And I can see there's a bit of a thread going on about that as well. Should we just, because of time, just spend a couple of moments talking about those ceremonies before we go into living Jewishly more widely than just marriage? Because not everyone will choose to get married, and there's certainly a bigger conversation to be had about how we truly are one community. I think all I'll say in terms of how I plan dual heritage blessings, and I liked calling them dual heritage rather than mixed faith, because often I've done a couple of marriages where it's two people of different faiths coming together, Christian, Catholic in that one instance, and Muslim, but mostly it's someone who doesn't have a faith who's coming in. So I like dual heritage as a kind of catch-me-all of where the people are coming. And it's really important for me when I work with any couple that there's a process, 4 or 5 sessions of learning with them about how they relate to marriage, what their relationship is, what Judaism has to say about it. So I can see there's a question just now about, do you offer counselling? It's not counselling, but certainly space to be able to talk about what does it mean to be in a Jewish space. And what I would say is I love doing dual heritage blessings more than almost anything else, because the couple have really come in with intention. They've already had conversations about what does it mean to have a rabbi officiate? What does it mean to have Hebrew and Judaism in the ceremony? They've had to have some really hard and deep conversations already. And then from that place, we get to create something that really speaks to both of them. And I always make it really clear that it's not subsuming the non-Jewish partner all of a sudden into Judaism, which is why I think marrying in works as a term, because often that is what happens, because Judaism is quite all-consuming. My dad certainly found that. He can swear in Yiddish like a trooper. But it's really about making it meaningful and making sure that both couples and both part of the couples and their families are really held. So is it bringing in poetry? Is it bringing in texts that speak to both of them that aren't necessarily Jewish? And for me, I tend to use either Friday night as the symbol of wine, which is part of the legal Jewish wedding, candle lighting, maybe Havdalah, maybe spices, but that Havdalah candle is very powerful because of the weaving of the wicks together. So those kind of independent strands coming together, which is really gorgeous. I do not do a ketubah. Again, we have a variety of practice. We don't have a document because it isn't technically a legal Jewish wedding because the two people aren't Jewish. So that makes sense to me. But so I don't do a document for that, but would do a chuppah, would do 7 blessings, but they wouldn't be the traditional Sheva Brachot because they just don't make sense, I don't think, if you're both not Jewish, because they're very particular. But 7 values that really speak to them, that they have friends and family maybe using. So really it feels, it smells, it feels, it looks like a Jewish wedding, but it's using our traditional elements creatively and meaningfully as well. So that's probably all I'll say on it because of time.
I really want to ensure that the non-Jewish part of the family feel real ownership of the ceremony. And I think that takes a little bit of crafting to ensure that the mothers of the bride or the groom or the other bride or the other groom or whoever is getting married feel like they're really invested in the ceremony and they understand it, and there are no surprises that keep them on the edge, which can sometimes happen, right, with customs that feel foreign. So that's really important to me, and I will often try and bring readings or customs from the other faith or heritage that come in and that often can be so appreciated. I remember once one of the grooms came from an Iranian background, and the one thing they wanted to have was this table full of special things that happen at an Iranian wedding. And it only added, we had the chuppah here, we had the table next to it, we were able to speak about everything that was on the table, and there was no sense of it rubbing or contradicting in any way. Everything came together. For me also, I also use Havdalah, but in a slightly different way. I use the Havdalah candle because of the idea of lahavdil, that most couples that I get to do a ceremony for have been living together. And so that idea of them going home to their home that they have already made and sustained in a slightly different way really lends itself to lahavdil, to make a distinction by that candle, and to have sometimes mothers or fathers or dear friends offer a blessing as they light that candle. We all say the Shehechianu, which I'll explain in as many ways as I can because it's the best blessing ever. And just so that you're, exactly as Robyn says, you're using what we have, but you're expanding and enriching it. And sometimes I think, I hope that won't always be the case, but sometimes I think you think harder. You think harder and more creatively for a dual heritage wedding ceremony blessing. So yes, just adding a few to Robyn's ideas. I'm also looking at the chat and I'm kind of interested in something that Jonathan said, and then maybe we can look at living Jewishly and Jewish adjacently, is to just think about what works for a couple and whether the rabbi or the Jewish clergy leading it is, for all parts of it, is inclusive. Thinking about I think I heard what you said, Jonathan, about what your wife felt like, and maybe she wouldn't necessarily want the Jewish clergy to lead it all. And of course there's so many options with the registrar that it can be shared, and you can choose the tiniest bit that the registrar does and not even exchange rings, or you could have a half and half ceremony so that you have as much as you want with the registrar and then do it again with the rabbi or whoever you're choosing to have it done with. So I think there's a lot of scope to be creative. And I want to add Robyn's words that I'm so sorry, Gail, also for you. I think it's incredibly alienating and hurtful to have lived as an engaged Jew and then to be turned away at that moment. And I think we really hope, and I'm speaking for Robyn, but I'm pretty sure she will agree, that we really hope that the coming together will ensure that there's really that shared value of respect and honouring folk that have lived their lives as Jews, and to honour that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I was really struck by Rabbi Danny Rich's comment about respect. Like, it's also respectful to honor the holistic idea of who we are in the world and what people we love and the people we're raising and all of that. So it's really important, and it's a value, and these sessions are great for saying this is really a key value. This really matters. It's not just about dual heritage blessings, because if we're going to disrupt the narratives and the painful experiences that Gail has had, and I've heard so many different experiences over the years in not only progressive communities but in much wider communities, and that narrative that we heard earlier on, that it isn't okay to marry someone who isn't Jewish, which is very much not part of progressive Judaism, we really embrace and celebrate. We disrupt all of that by really making sure we are saying to anyone who walks into the synagogue, we knew you were coming and we're grateful you're here, rather than then having to kind of squeeze in and find a space that it's really clear, like, yeah, of course you should be here and you can be here in whatever way that means for you. Everyone will choose to, if they're a non-Jewish part of a family, will jump in as little or as much as they want to without the pressure. But here are some of the kind of headings that we thought we could touch on, and in the chat, if there's stuff you're particularly interested in, do say, and we can kind of go there. and these different moments in synagogue life, I think in particularly synagogue and communities. And I think maybe I'll just pick two that I'm interested in or think are important, and then Rabbi Rebecca can, or we can pick up on the chat. The two that feel really important to me, one is burial and mourning rituals. For me, I find, as when I was a community rabbi, that was one of the most painful pastoral conversations that were had, and within my family, of it's all very well, but what does it mean when my loved one passes away? Can I mark that Jewishly? What would that look like? And my answer is, and always was, of course. We have a principle in Judaism of kavod hamet, honoring the person who has passed away, and kavod ha'avelim, honoring the mourners. And it's always that balance of what would that person feel comfortable with? Like, if they were anti-religion, if they were anti-God, would it be appropriate to have those kind of words said at a ceremony? But really balancing the two. But is it okay to say Kaddish for someone who isn't Jewish, but was kind of part of the community or beloved? Of course. These are rituals that mean something really deeply to us, and we can have our embrace much wider, I would say. And I think that's pretty much shared in all progressive spaces as well. But really thinking through the mourning rituals of what does that mean for family members who aren't Jewish and aren't used to a shiva? How do you make that super accessible and really meaningful for everybody? These are all really important spaces and conversations to have, and there are some really interesting and helpful websites out there. I can maybe put them in the chat while Rabbi Rebecca is speaking as well, because there's great stuff out there. And the second one that I would maybe uplift, because I think it's really interesting, is Hebrew names. Because how we name ourselves and how we are in spaces really shapes who we are as individuals. And I think Hebrew names really speaks to me about also the beauty of working out what's appropriate and what isn't for you personally. So my Hebrew name is Ravina Bat Shulamit, after my mum, Shulamit Sherry, and I don't have my dad's name in it. It's not Shulamit Vabrian, partly because he's not passed down to me my Jewish heritage. That's been passed down through my mum, so I've chosen not to have his name, and it didn't feel right to give him a Hebrew name because he isn't Jewish, and he wouldn't use it. It would be kind of probably a strange thing for him to have. And yeah, I have absolutely no qualms at all if someone else wanted to add their non-Jewish parent into their Hebrew name. And I think it's always a question of like, what are we naming and honoring, and how do we also honor others if we're using that heritage? So I just wanted to kind of uplift those two, because I think they speak to quite interesting moments as well.
Definitely. So I also wanted to choose Hebrew names because I think we have lots of dual heritage families in synagogues, and to be able to honor and to give that option to honoring, but also honouring sometimes is not to include, as Robyn said, the non-Jewish parent, and that doesn't mean that we're diminishing or excluding, but sometimes that will be a choice. I was just talking to two brides tonight who are having a dual heritage ceremony in July, and one of them said, "Oh, my future father-in-law asked me if I'm going to take a Hebrew name," and of course we discussed, why would she? Why would she be expected to take a Hebrew name, or why would it necessarily be appropriate? She is not at this moment in time choosing conversion. She may at some point. And I think that sense of trying to make everything tidy and fit in to the way the community works sometimes ends up being not respectful in loads of different ways. So the other thing I wanted to comment on was voluntary roles, not just security. And I feel that 20, 30 years ago, the non-Jewish parent would be asked to do things outside the synagogue, making assumptions that they wouldn't want to be involved. And yet my experience as a congregational rabbi for the last 23, 24 years is that it is often the non-Jewish parent that does the most work and the most commitment to ensure children are educated, rock up at Hebrew school, bar bat mitzvah lessons are arranged. And I've really learned a tremendous amount about that, to expand and be a little more creative how synagogue life functions. And what we've seen, Rabbi Robyn and I are super aware that different synagogues have different membership models. perhaps we have an associate model for those who either are connected to someone wrote that I love that. Georgia said Judjacent. That's brilliant. We really like that. For someone who is Judjacent, someone who may be on a journey to becoming Jewish, someone maybe who's a member of another synagogue and wants to support our synagogue. I think there are so many models of that, but with that comes really thinking about what it means to be engaged in synagogue life, maybe from not as involved as the Jewish partner, but maybe yes, in different ways. And I really think that congregations work through the power of relationships and connections and self-interest that builds the joy in a synagogue. And I think that really is across the board, and we are only enriched by the different people that are involved in synagogue life.
We've got 2 minutes left, but I might just pick up on Erica's comment about, what if a child of a mixed faith family doesn't decide to observe Shabbat? And obviously we kind of, in Progressive Judaism, what does observe mean? We can unpack that in a later session. That should be fine, but how does that benefit Jewish heritage and continuity? The Torah warns against it. So I wanted to say quite strongly, Rabbi Lionel Blue used to say, Judaism should be a home, not a prison. And I certainly, in my experience and being in community, know that Judaism thrives when it's allowed to thrive, when people are able to enter into what is Jewish within the framework of Torah, within the framework of our progressive and Jewish tradition. I always like to say we're Jewish. It's not progressive Judaism. We're actually just Jewish. We've been doing things like this for a very long time. It's nothing new. That it thrives better, that people get the choice, they get to work out what identity looks like, rather than it being a prison in it as well. So I think if there's anything else that we haven't covered, you could quickly unmute, but we should probably kind of wrap up, really. It's been great. Thank you so much for all your engagement and really thoughtful comments and sharing experiences as well. Rabbi Lionel Blue is one of my favorites too, really. His work is still speaking so profoundly to us all. So thank you, and to Simon and Graham for organising and holding the space in the background as well. I think we can draw it to a close, but thank you, and good luck in making your inclusive communities even more inclusive, and questioning those narratives that we may still be dealing with as well.